Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we take a closer look at the week's top political stories. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. We're here to give you the facts so you can form your own opinion. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for being with us. Today, we'll unpack our latest nationwide analysis of school district and board member characteristics and preview this fall's school board elections. Here with me today are staff writers Mish St-Hill.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Mish, and Samuel Wanacott. How's it going, Samuel?
Very swell. Thanks.
Great to have you both here. To start, could you share with our listeners a brief history of your time here at Ballotpedia, how you came to work here, what do you cover in your work, etc.? Let's start with you, Mish.
Well, this was during the 2020 election. I hadn't really heard of Ballotpedia before, but some celebrities that I follow on Instagram actually gave you guys a shout out. I think it was Kerry Washington, actually. Kerry, if you're listening, I love you. And so, yeah, I checked it out and I found that Ballotpedia was exactly what I was looking for in terms of providing me with unbiased information so that I could make some decisions on who I was voting for in the elections. And I've been a loyal follower of Ballotpedia ever since. And so when the opportunity came for me to join the team, I definitely jumped at it. And it's just been great to work, in the background and kind of help, provide the information that I myself use all the time.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kerry, for sending us Mish. And how about you, Samuel?
I went to Boise State University. I majored in economics and English, but found myself getting into reporting and journalism. And I was familiar with Ballotpedia and used it pretty extensively in my own research. And when I saw the job opening, I hopped to it. I've been working here since late 2019, I believe. Cover elections and write newsletters and write about school board politics.
Yeah, this report is your baby, I hear. So we're excited to talk to you about it. Speaking of the subject matter at hand, on August 24th, Ballotpedia filled a major knowledge gap with the launch of its school district and board member analysis report. There are more than 13,000 K-12 public school districts in the U.S. And due to the hyperlocal nature of school boards, there has never been a comprehensive analysis detailing the makeup of U.S. school boards. Until now, that is. The report covers a bunch of interesting data points, and I'd like to run through your greatest hits of them for our listeners. But before we start, Sam, why did Ballotpedia think it was important to create a resource like this?
And to put it simply, the data just wasn't there, and we felt that it should be. Look, the U.S. education system, public education system, is a little complicated. It's split between several layers of governments with overlapping jurisdictions, local governments, state governments, the federal government. And so that comprehensive data is just hard to come by because of that. We've got a lot of small and rural schools where information is just hard to find. So in the past, all that information has been difficult to gather. And so we went ahead and we put it together.
One of the things that struck me the most was just the sheer scope of the project, the number of districts and members we covered.
Same here. There are 13,194 school districts nationwide with 82,423 school board members, which is way more than I might have expected. 15% of all elected officials in the U.S. are school board members, which is a pretty big chunk.
Yeah, the 82,000 number is a huge amount. Something I'm wondering about, Samuel, is just how different school board makeup and representation can be.
Yeah, so that all varies state by state. The average school board has 6.25 members. The lowest average is in West Virginia, which has a 3.45 school board members per district. The highest is in Connecticut with 9.97 members. Hawaii and Washington, D.C., they have 9 members for all of their districts, but they're outliers because Hawaii only has one school district that covers all the schools on the islands. And Washington, D.C. also only has one school district. And Victoria, you're from Texas, right?
Right.
So you guys have the most school board members by far, with 6,944 elected members. It's the only state with over 1,000 school districts.
So I guess everything really is bigger in Texas, huh?
Seemingly.
Which states have the fewest and most school districts?
Yeah, so as I discussed, Hawaii is an outlier. So it only has one district. The State Department of Education basically oversees all of Hawaii's schools. But setting Hawaii aside, there are 3 states with the fewest number of districts. That's Delaware with 19 districts, Nevada with 20, and Maryland with 24. And of course, the 3 states with the most districts are Texas, as we've discussed, with 1,022 districts, California with 977, and Illinois with 853.
And in these districts, 71% of all school board members are appointed to at-large seats, which means the member represents the entire population, not a specific district. And of those 82,000 school board members we researched, we classified 52% as male and 43% as female, which was kind of surprising to me because the gender ratio of teachers tilts predominantly female. Do any states deviate from this nationwide average in a noteworthy way?
Yeah, so in a few states, there's a clear gender imbalance. In Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Texas, for example, the proportion of male school board members is around 11 percentage points higher than nationwide. So in those states, more than 60% of school board members are male. No state has more than 60% of their school board members who are women. Florida, Alaska, and Maryland, however, have the highest percentage of female school board members.
Well, with November inching closer and closer, we're hoping this report will become another key resource for voters as they prepare to head to the polls. We appreciate all the work you and your team put into this, Samuel.
Yeah, of course.
Now let's take a look ahead to the fall school board elections, Mish. One of the biggest storylines we're following this year is just the uptick in the number of candidates for school board seats. School boards have always been important functionally to how schools work, of course, but in recent years, they've attracted a lot of public attention and have become the front lines in a way for many of the nation's most important political conversations. About how substantial has the uptick in candidates been, Mish?
There's been a noteworthy increase in candidates running for these seats. This year, 2.48 candidates are running for each seat in the 1,258 school board races we're covering in districts where the filing deadline has passed thus far. That's 24% more than in 2020.
And in 2020, I saw that there were 1.94 candidates per seat. 2.48 really doesn't sound like that big of a difference. So what's the significance of the uptick in candidates here?
So this might seem small, but any value less than 2 means we likely have a number of uncontested seats, whereas a value over 2 means more voters have more choices to make at the polls.
Got it. That definitely puts things in perspective. Let's stay on the same theme of our past school board election coverage. What data might be good to keep in mind this fall?
Well, from 2018 to 2021, Ballotpedia covered elections for 3,319 school board seats in 1,141 school districts.
Yeah, that's right. And we found that between 24% and 40% of elections were unopposed each year. We also found that incumbents won between 51% and 61% of seats each year, and that between 79 and 80% of incumbents who sought re-election won re-election.
So basically, incumbents tend to retain ground and win re-election at pretty high marks when it comes to school boards, at least based on historical precedent.
That's interesting. Could you both walk us through some of the key issues that are animating school board elections this year?
Yeah, so we've been conducting some really cool analysis for almost a year now, where we've been trying to identify school board races where some of these hot button issues come up. And I'll send you a link if you want to dig into it, or perhaps we can add it to the show notes.
And if you don't have time for that, there are 3 main issues we've decided are central to school board elections. The first is race in education and critical race theory, so including the role of race in curricula and learning materials, as well as district-specific equity and or diversity plans. Another is responses to the coronavirus pandemic, which includes things like mask requirements, vaccine requirements, and school reopening or distance learning plans. And lastly, sex and gender in schools, including sexual education curricula and learning materials, as well as the usage of gender-specific facilities like restrooms, locker rooms, etc.
And before I let you both go, are there any school board elections that we're paying particularly close attention to?
At this point in the year, most of the districts in our coverage scope have held primaries, so going forward, our attention will turn to the general elections in November.
Yeah, it should be some exciting stuff. Last week, we covered school board primary elections in Florida. Now, Florida has some of the largest districts in the country when measured by student enrollment, and these school board races received a great deal of media attention. And that's at least in part because Republican Governor Ron DeSantis and his general election opponent, Democrat and former Governor Charlie Crist, endorsed a number of school board candidates. We covered some of these elections this week in Hall Pass, which is our weekly newsletter focused on school board politics. So For listeners who want an unbiased account of these elections, I would really encourage you to go and subscribe to that newsletter, to Hall Pass, where you can read about the Florida primary elections and other elections that we've covered, as well as other topics in education. As far as Florida's school board primary elections go, I'll just say that, just to give listeners a flavor, about 83% of the candidates that DeSantis backed won their elections, and about 71% of Christ's won their elections. DeSantis backed candidates who aligned with his 10-point plan, what he calls the DeSantis education agenda, which includes rejecting school lockdowns and increasing teacher pay. Christ backed candidates who say they want to keep politics out of the classroom and protect students' freedom to learn. Overall, what happened in Florida last week is just more evidence that state and national politics are playing big roles in nonpartisan school board elections. And that is something that became increasingly clear over the course of the pandemic. These local school board races are just attracting a lot of national attention. So we'll be following and reporting on Florida school board general elections, as well as school board general elections in other states as we get close to November. And we'll keep listeners updated on that.
Great. Thank you both for coming on the show and sharing this insight. It's been very helpful.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria.
Hey listeners, this is Jeff Paulet here, Ballotpedia's editor-in-chief. One of the best ways to be an informed voter is by reviewing your ballot before heading off to the polls. And here at Ballotpedia, we've tried to make that as simple as possible with our sample ballot tool. With just a few clicks, the sample ballot tool gives you a comprehensive glimpse at what you'll be voting on. Our coverage scope for local elections continues to grow, and you can use this tool to see what elections we're covering in your area. Click on your candidates to read their biography, view past election results, read their campaign stances, or their responses to our proprietary and unique candidate survey, and more. We also provide election overviews and encyclopedic information on our 300,000 articles and growing full Ballotpedia.org database. Don't head to the polls this election season without checking out Ballotpedia's sample ballot tool. You can find that at Ballotpedia.org/sample ballot. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back, listeners. Paul Rader is back with more Footnote Facts. I'm serving up another hot batch of knowledge, somewhat related to last week's segment on voter turnout. Today, it's about the expansion of the right to vote, also known as suffrage. First up is today's trivia question. Which amendment to the U.S. Constitution was the quickest ever to be ratified? All shall be revealed soon. So it's been a long, arduous road for voting rights in this country. Many people know that racial minorities and women did not have the right to vote at one point, or for a very long time. But even in the earliest days of the Republic and prior to the U.S. Constitution's ratification, not even all white males could vote. Back then, voting power was concentrated amongst landowners, and owning land was vital to one's social status at the time. Eventually, non-landowning white males would gain suffrage, but it took constitutional amendments to extend it to minorities and females. It was the 15th Amendment in 1870 that granted suffrage to men regardless of race, and the 19th Amendment in 1920 for women. But black voters were still often prevented from voting through other means while still technically being enfranchised. Jim Crow laws instituted prohibitive measures such as literacy tests and poll taxes that disproportionately affected black voters, while also implementing measures such as grandfather clauses, which granted people the right to vote if their grandfathers could, so that poor and illiterate white voters could still cast ballots. And this would really start to change with civil rights legislation in the mid-20th century, particularly with the ratification of the 24th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in 1964, and that outlawed poll taxes, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Yet the most recent amendment dealing with voting rights was the 26th Amendment in 1971. This was the amendment that knocked the minimum voting age down from 21 to 18 years old. Now, before that, some states had lowered their minimum voting age to 18, and the seeds of lowering that age can be traced back to at least 1943, when Georgia lowered its minimum voting age from 21 to 18 for state and local elections. And then you saw the Vietnam War really accelerated public support for lowering the minimum voting age. Common mantra then and even before was old enough to fight, old enough to vote. So eventually there came to be a lot of support for lowering the minimum voting age from government officials as well. A bill in 1970 that amended the aforementioned Voting Rights Act of 1965 had a provision that lowered the minimum voting age to 18 in federal, state, and local elections. But constitutionality questions led to the 1970 Supreme Court case Oregon versus Mitchell. And the court, in a 5-4 ruling, stated that Congress could lower the minimum voting age only in federal elections, but not state or local. And that would lead up to the ratification of the 26th Amendment in 1971, which lowered the minimum voting age to 18 across the board. And that is a perfect lead-in to the trivia question from the beginning of this segment, which is, which amendment to the U.S. Constitution was the quickest ever to be ratified? And the answer is that very one we were just talking about, the 26th Amendment. It took just over 2 months to ratify. Good job today if you answer correctly. I don't have any funny or witty quips to add, which is like every other week, really. But I will always have intriguing and relevant trivia for you. I'll have more ready to go next week, but now it's time to return the mic back to Victoria.
Thanks, Paul. If keeping up with all of this political news has your head spinning, subscribe to Ballotpedia's Weekly Brew newsletter for a roundup of the most viewed stories from our daily newsletter. It's short and sweet, so you can get informed and get on with your day. Here are some headlines from last week's edition, which came out on August 26th. The number of U.S. incumbents defeated in primaries has reached a 20-year high. U.S. Representatives Mondaire Jones and Carolyn Maloney, Democrats from New York, lost in their respective primaries on August 23rd, bringing the total number of U.S. House incumbents defeated in primaries this cycle to 15. Primary defeats tend to increase in election cycles following redistricting, as incumbents often run against other incumbents under newly drawn lines. And in other news, an initiative to change election and voting policies has been certified for the Arizona ballot. Among other things, the initiative would make changes to early voting policy and repeal the existing law that makes it a felony to collect another person's ballot. If approved, Arizona would become the 21st state to enact automatic voter registration policies. For more, go to ballotpedia.org and find the email updates tab, or use the link in our show notes to sign up for the Weekly Brew newsletter, or to check out our other newsletters. And that's all for this week's episode of On the Ballot. Thanks again to Mij, Samuel, and Paul for coming on the show. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back next week to discuss state legislative competitiveness and the availability of voter files. If you have any questions, comments, or love for Ballotpedia, feel free to send it to us at ontheballot@ballotpedia.org or on Twitter @Ballotpedia. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for listening.